Let me show you all this real quick. Oh, I'm sorry, Raphael. I saw your hand. What you got?
Just a question. Since she spoke with Bill, Bill represents the seller, not her. Can then she ask someone else to represent her? And then you have like not a yeah. Well, then you have Bill, you, and then someone else involved.
No,
No.
no. I mean, the thing is, she doesn't have an agency agreement with Bill in any way, shape, or form. So if she wants some representation, then Bill gets kicked out of the deal because if like we're not going to pay a seller sub agent and a buyer's agent. We're gonna say one or the other, right? We may let you be a seller sub agent, we may let you be a buyer's agent, but we're not going to allow both to participate in the transaction to that extent. That's not going to fly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then would someone tell her like, listen, we recommend that you work with someone?
Yes, we're going to get into that. Bill would have already gone over that in great detail. That is that working with a real estate agent's disclosure that we've been talking about. So we're going to get there. I just, sometimes I've got to put the cart before the horse to help you understand the horse as it goes. That being said, I'm going to show you this thing, but it's close enough to your break. So let's go ahead and take your break. So now that we're working our way back, Bree, what was the question? Because like I said, I want to make sure I answered it in front of everybody. When you have questions that pertain to the material, I don't like to answer them as like one-offs on break. So
Yeah, I was saying that you were saying that nobody in XYZ or nobody else outside of Seth and Bill, you Seth, but you and Bill could represent the seller or be a part of this transaction for Janet on Janet's behalf. What I was asking is, once Janet realizes her decision and this, like the effects of it, saying no one's going to represent you and there's no other way to do it because you decided not to do that, can she then say, actually, I want Bill to be removed as co-broker and then represent me?
yes. Yeah. Now, if we start off this way, understand, right? If we start off this way, and this is kind of advanced, and we're gonna get there, and so Bill is representing the seller, and we start this transaction in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just negotiations, and then Janet has this realization, wait, I've changed my mind, I realize I'm screwed, I want Bill to represent me, and I want to have a buyer's agent. At this point, we would have to ask the seller's permission because you're asking to switch teams. Think of it like the NFL. You can't trade somebody unless both teams want to trade, right? And so you would have to go to the seller and say, hey, we had Bill acting as a seller sub agent and Janet was unrepresented, but she wants to switch and she wants Bill to be her buyer's agent. And if the seller doesn't object to it, sure, she can switch, or he can switch, should I say. And I'm going to give you several scenarios like that, so hang tight. But absolutely, you can. Now, here's what I wanted to show y'all that I was hunting down, folks. Remember, I told you our class flows like the March 2023 syllabus. And in the agency section, you will look and you will see that it's starting to explain these agency relationships. And of course, single agency means when we only care about one or the other, right? Single buyer agency, single seller agency. And this gives a comparison about like the company only represents property owners. It could be a company that only works with sellers, or at least in the transaction, we only represent the seller. We don't care about the buyer. That's the single agency piece. But if you look down, when two companies cooperate in a cross-sale or co-broker transaction, we've got two companies working together. It's called co-brokered. And look right here, different options. Listing company can refuse to offer sub-agency to the other company. So seller sub-agency from a co-brokered point of view, like I just showed you, is absolutely a thing. But it all comes down to what did we decide on our listing agreement with the seller? And you're going to see the exact spot that this happens on the agency agreement in a little bit. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow night. It just depends. But everybody's still with me so far when we're talking about these relationships, right? Folks, sometimes when we do co-broker deals, one firm represents the buyer, one firm represents the seller. That's still exclusive representation because they've got representation. There's no blurred lines. There's none of that. But you got to be very careful, though, because in these scenarios I just gave you, there's two firms and two licensees but there's only single agency still. Because technically in that seller sub-agency, that's exclusive seller representation. Even though 2 firms, 2 licensees, it's still exclusive seller agency because the buyer is unrepresented. So it is very important to understand these relationships and, the difference between seller sub-agency and exclusive agency and, dual agency and the licensees and the firms and all those different things. So I'm going to say it again before I switch slides, folks. When a firm cares about only the buyer or only the seller in a transaction, that is a single agency transaction. It's exclusive representation, bar none. And we don't call it that anymore when the firm is representing the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. At that point, it's called dual agency. Okay, it's called dual agency. If a firm, which is the agent, represents the buyer and the seller in the same transaction, that's called dual agency. Why? Because you've got loyalties to both. You are supposed to look after both. You owe old car to both. Now, folks, let me ask you a question. Better yet, let me give you a scenario. And I'm going to take myself out of this one because I always love to just teach this with a couple different scenarios. And so let me pick some people here. I'm going to pick some short names. Who has the shortest name in here? Paige, you're one of them. I don't know that you have the shortest name, but you're the first one that wasn't like 17 letters that I saw. So I'm going to make Paige work for XYZ Realty. And Paige has a seller at 123 Main Street. I'm very creative, by the way. It's always 123 Main Street. Occasionally, I'll throw in a Walnut Street, but that's about all I got. As many neighborhoods and street names, you would think I'd come up with more, but nope. 123 Main Street. So Paige has a seller at 123 Main Street. And then I'm also still putting XYZ. And I'm going to put Bridge. Haha, nice short name. Thanks, Bridge. Appreciate you, mama. Okay. So, folks, it's not, I love all your names. Okay. It's just that I'm writing with a mouse pen, right? And it's not kind of like janky. Listen, my handwriting is so bad in real life. Writing with a mouse is even worse. Okay. Y'all don't judge me. All right. Y'all just have to be able to read it. So, Bridge has a buyer. Okay. And I want you to think about this. Folks, I want you to think of them first and foremost independently, okay? They both work for XYZ Realty. And so when the buyer calls up Bridge, what kind of conversations do you think the buyer and Bridge are going to have before they start house hunting?
Find out if she has representation.
Well, yeah, we're going to find out if this buyer has representation, but then let's say that they don't, and now Bridge is hired to represent this buyer. And so now the buyer says, Bridge, you're my agent. I want to find a great house. What questions, what conversations do you think Bridge and this buyer are going to have before they go house hunting?
Is she pre-qualified?
Yeah, what's your budget? What's your motivation? Your price range, right? Because listen, that's his client. So he owes his client old car, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality. Everybody agree? Sure. So let's say that Bridge has these conversations with his buyer, and his buyer has $600,000 in cash in the bank, and they are looking for a, really quick 30-day close. And, as long as they find the right house, they will pull the trigger and pay cash for it. I'm going to leave that there for a second. Okay, well, Paige gets hired to sell the seller's property at 123 Main Street. Once Paige is hired by the seller, what conversations do you think Paige and the seller probably had?
Listing price, terms.
Yeah, what's an appropriate list price? What would you be okay with? What kind of closing terms? What kind of due diligence? What kind of whatever? And so let's say that, just to make this simple, Paige has a conversation with the seller, and they've listed the property at $425. But Paige and the seller both know that they would be fine if they got an offer as low as $375, right? They've had this conversation. So this is the list price, but they would be okay with this price. But because she owes confidentiality to this seller, it's fine. So we're going to have these confidential conversations with our clients because we're going to keep them secret. We're going to have loyalties. We're going to do all these different things. But here's what you've got to understand, folks. If Bridge is working with this buyer and he takes this buyer to see a listing from ABC Realty, if he takes this buyer to see a listing from Cole Banker, if he takes this buyer to see a listing from Keller Williams, folks, was Bridge ever acting in a capacity different than exclusive buyer agency? No. Because in those potential transactions, XYZ only cared about Bridge's buyer, and the seller was represented by other brokerage firms. That's single agency, you agree? Okay. Well, let's say that there are buyers being represented by Keller Williams who come to see Paige's listings, buyers represented by Cole Banker who come to see Paige's listings, buyers represented by ABC Realty to come see Paige's listing. Folks, in those potential transactions, is that anything other than exclusive seller representation? No, because who is the only person that XYZ cares about in that potential transaction? Paige's seller. But watch what happens when you take all this out of the equation, because these relationships started off as exclusive buyer representation and exclusive seller representation. But the second that Bridge's buyer wants to see Paige's listing, things change, don't they? Because who is the buyer's agent?
Bridge.
XYZ Realty. Who is the seller's agent?
Same.
XYZ Realty. The definition of dual agency is when the firm represents the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Now, I want to play out a scenario for you here, okay? I'm giving you a scenario before I fully taught you this just to prove a point. So roll with me. If you've read ahead, play along, okay? If we have this scenario and Bridge takes his buyer to go see this house, and after he gets done seeing it, the buyer wants to put an offer in on it. And so here's what the buyer says to Bridge. He said, Bridge, I love this house. I want it. I need it. I got to have it. When asked, because here's what the buyer's going to say, Bridge, what should I offer on this property? What is Bridge going to say? Full price? Nothing? Market value? Nothing? He can't advise? Disclose dual agency? Okay, well, let me take this a step further. Let's just play out this fictitious scenario because this is a multifaceted learning point here. Let's say that somehow, some way, some whatever, Bridge and his buyer come up with an offer of $400,000. And this offer gets sent over to Paige, and Paige sends it to her seller. And her seller looks at her and says, well, Paige, $400,000, should we take it? What is Paige going to say? What do you think, Paige? You good with $400,000? No? Yes?
The only offer.
Well, it's the only offer. Folks, let me help you put some things in perspective, and then I'm going to give you another scenario. I'm going to change the scenario to really take it to another level. Think about it this way, right here, right now. What is your job as a buyer's agent? If I said, explain to me the job of a buyer's agent in layman's terms, tell me like I'm stupid. What is the job of a buyer's agent? Old car is not our job. That's our fiduciary obligations to our client. Brad says, find a property for the buyer. Bill says, take care of the buyer. There you go. Let's come on. Bridge says, help the buyer procure the house at the lowest price. Folks, if I help you get a house, but I could have gotten it for you for like $50,000 cheaper, did I really look after your best interest? No. So let's say that. Help you find a house and get you the best stinking deal I probably can. You everybody okay with that summation there? Okay, well, let's flip the coin. Tell me the job of a listing agent in layman's terms, the most simple way that you can possibly describe it to me. What is the job of a listing agent?
Get the most for the house.
Sell the house and get the most stinking money for your seller. Folks, you want to sell the house for so much money that the seller starts making some questionable decisions. You know what I'm saying? Right? They go out and buy a sports car. They try a little Coke or something. I'm kidding. I'm just making sure y'all are awake, okay? Nobody condones drugs. I'm just seeing if y'all are awake. Everybody calm down, all right? Drugs are bad, okay? We want to sell their house for the most stinking money. Does that change anything from what I just asked you? Would you change anything on what you told me Bridge would say in that scenario?
Bridge would find out the lowest price that they would take it for and tell his client to offer that. But then that would be a conflict of interest because he would know that information because of what he's representing in the firm.
Yeah, we got some issues here, right? Because as Raphael just said too, the firm represents both. Folks, let me change something here, okay? Just to really paint a picture and help this point come across a little bit easier. Bridge, I'm going to temporarily take you out of the equation, okay? So now I want you to imagine Paige still has this listing. Paige still had the conversations with the seller that it's listed for $425, but that they would accept $375. And imagine that the buyer that was previously working with Bridge, let's say Bridge is not existent, okay? This buyer picks up the phone and calls Paige from Paige's sign in the yard. Is Paige going to show the home to this buyer? Sure. And so that buyer would be what? At the time that they're viewing this home with Paige?
Unrepresented.
A customer, aka an unrepresented buyer. Because Paige's loyalties are with the seller. So of course, Paige is going to disclose that. Paige is going to show the home to the buyer. And of course, the buyer knows that they're unrepresented. But as we've said, her job as a listing agent is to get the house sold. Of course, she's going to show it. So I want you to imagine that at the end of showing it, the buyer says to Paige, well, Paige, you have just been fantastic and we really like you. I understand that you work for the seller, but could you represent us as well? Can Paige represent the buyer as well? Sure. With informed and written consent, you can do dual agency this way too. Now, I'm going to take this a few steps. Hang tight about questions about disclosure. We're going to get into disclosure in great detail. You got to understand there's other lessons that I think you need to know before you learn the other disclosure pieces. It helps it kind of come full circle. So here's the crazy thing, right? Imagine now that Paige is also representing this buyer. And imagine that this buyer says to Paige, much like they fictitiously said to Bridge earlier, well, hey, listen, we love this house. We have $600,000 in the bank. We are very motivated. What should we offer? What is Paige going to say to this buyer? Raphael says 600K. Bree says nothing. All of it.
Could you say 400? That way you're making more on both ends.
It's never going to be about us making more money. Remember those fiduciary duties. The client's needs, wants, and desires come before our own. Brett says full price. Raphael says put an offer. Tara says she can't say anything. Here's the thing. If Tara, not Tara, God, I keep my brain, Lord have mercy. Y'all don't give me this many days off anymore, okay? I can't even keep a name straight tonight. That's what happens. I get rusty. If Paige suggests to the buyer that they should pay $600,000, she has helped the seller but hurt the buyer. Well, she's got loyalties to both. If Paige suggests to the buyer $375, then she has helped the buyer and hurt the seller. And Paige has loyalties to both. Folks, they have exceptionally differentiating best possible outcomes. Because sellers want to make the most money, buyers want to get the best deal. And she wants to look after both. And the question is, how do you do that? Now, listen, Paige, I need you to help me out with something here, okay? Okay, I need you to unmute real quick. Help me out. Okay, Paige, I need you to just, and this, don't make this weird. I'm just trying to, this is going to help everybody learn a lesson here. Paige, do me a favor. I'm going to tell y'all what Paige has to tell her clients right here, right now, when they ask the question, right? Because the buyer's going to ask what they should offer, and the seller's going to ask what they should accept. And so when the buyer asks, what should I offer? Paige, put your finger right here at the edge of your hair. Right here. Start twirling it a little bit. And say, I don't know. What do you want to offer? Go ahead, say it.
I don't know. What do you want to offer?
Perfect. Thank you. That was perfect. Paige, you nailed it. Folks, do you know when you go out to eat with your significant other and you're like, what do you want for dinner? I don't know. What do you want for dinner? I don't know. What are you thinking? What sounds good? What do you want to do? That's the answer. Paige just did it perfectly. Paige is going to look at him and play as coy as possible. Like, I don't know. What do you want to offer? What are you thinking? What do you want to do? And the buyer's going to be like, no, seriously, like, help me out. And you're like, no. What do you want to do? You tell me what you want to offer. Because if you help one, you hurt the other. So when the buyer decides what they want to offer, she's going to send it to the seller. And the seller's going to say, well, Paige, should we accept this? And what are you going to say, Paige?
I don't know. Do you want to accept it?
I don't know. Do you want to accept it? Huh? What do you think? You like it? You want to take this offer? Folks, everybody understand this? You can't help or hinder either because you've got loyalties to both, obligations to both. And if you help one, you hurt the other. So when you get down to the nitty gritty, a dual agent is useless. I want you to think of a dual agent as bound and gagged and worthless. You can't do nothing to help nobody. Useless. Sergio says take all the money from both of them. Got it. No. Remember the fiduciary duties. Their needs, wants, and desires come before our own. Also, I'm going to pick on y'all for a second because this is a large class. I have always taught it in these extremes because I find that students remember these crazy scenarios. But I will tell you this because even though when I'm teaching the extreme of like, hey, you're bound and gagged and worthless, you can always tell who the freaks are in the class because some people go like, ooh, right? They make these little faces like, I'm like, stop it. This is a real estate class. Then y'all get excited. Yeah, you know who I was talking about. You know who you are. I'm not naming any names. Lord have mercy. This class is PG, folks. Y'all keep it. Y'all keep it together. I'm seriously, every time I say that, somebody's like, wow, stop it. Stop it. Dual agency, just passing papers back and forth. That's exactly what it is. Janet, you're worthless. You can do nothing to help or hinder either party. You know secrets about all the parties, but you can't use them because that would be breaching your fiduciary duties. Now, folks, I want you to understand something. Let me take this one step further. When I bring bridge back into the scenario, listen to me very carefully. Nothing changes here. It is the exact same as what I just told you. When Bridge's buyers ask Bridge, what should we offer? Bridge will say, and Bridge has got kind of long hair too. He can pull it off. I don't know what you want to offer, right? I don't know. What are you thinking? Listen, for me, I just have to do the beard, right? The awkward beard twirl. Don't, it's weird. We're not going to do that. Listen to me. There are 2 licensees now, but it changes nothing. Because at the end of the day, if Bridge helps the buyer, XYZ has hurt the seller. And if Paige helps the seller, XYZ has hurt the buyer. And this, folks, this right here is why I told you when I say agent, you think firm. It is the firm that is the agent. The firm representing the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. That is the definition of dual agency. And your default on dual agency is worthless. Can't help or hinder anybody. You're Switzerland. Neutral. How we feeling? There's always a couple questions. What you got, Janet?
So going back to the example that you were giving with Bill helping the buyer, will it be the same thing?
No, that was not. That was not a dual agency scenario. That was a seller sub-agency scenario. Understand the difference. In seller sub-agency, it's exclusive seller representation. Bill represented the seller. I represented the seller. The buyer, nobody gave a crap about.
Okay. Did it matter if they worked with the same firm?
Didn't matter whether they worked with the same firm, no. Because that was still exclusive seller representation. Understand the difference. Seller sub-agency means everybody cares about the seller. That can't be dual. Dual is when the firm cares about the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. We didn't care about the buyer. They were a customer in that scenario. Giving it a moment to sink in. See if there's any other questions before I take it to the next level. Okay. So, dual agency, by definition, is when the firm represents the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Definition of dual agency is when the firm represents the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Now, folks, understand what's going to happen in a test question. They're probably not going to use the word dual agency in most of the test questions. What they will say is what I just did. Such and such has a buyer and they're with XYZ Realty. Such and such has a seller. They are also with XYZ Realty. And it will be asking what will happen in regard to the offer, disclosures, loyalties, whatever. You've got to default to the bound and gagged and worthless side of dual. Nobody can help or hurt anybody. I don't know, what do you want to do? I don't know, what do you want to do? But all it will say is the name of the firm for the seller and the buyer. And when they're the same, worthless, 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 worthless. Now understand that, go ahead, Raphael.
Okay, so there is no way to have some sort of a, like, agreement where, you know, both agents kind of get into like a middle ground somewhere?
Yes, there is. Hang tight. But remember, I teach you this in layers for a reason. You've got to get your brains one way, and then I'll tweak it a little bit. You've got to default to this worthless crap before I teach anything else. Because this will always be the default. Remember, I told you, every single thing in this class has a default. But there are exceptions to just about everything. That's why I'm telling you, there's very few absolutes, right?
Yeah, no, because I understand it, because in banking you have it's called like Chinese walls, where one department doesn't know what the other department is doing.
Yep. We'll get there. So before we get there, folks, understand that the only way you can legally do dual agency is with informed and written consent. Okay? Can you represent the buyer and the seller in the same transaction? Yeah. But not unless you have informed and written consent. And folks, understand that informed word. You have to look them in the eye and say, if we do dual, we are worthless to you and we can no longer advocate for you. You are responsible for making your own decisions. And that's kind of a big deal. Now, is it legal? Yes. With informed and written consent, you can do it. Now, here's the other thing that you have to understand, folks, and please make sure you can understand this distinction. Janet brought up the previous example where I had ABC Realty and XYZ Realty doing seller sub-agency. I'm going to say it again. That was exclusive seller representation because everybody only cared about the seller. Everybody okay with that statement? You have to understand, though, if we've got two different brokerage firms, listen, that will never, ever, 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 ever be dual agency. Dual agency is an in-house transaction only, meaning ABC Realty and ABC Realty has the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. But also be very cautious, folks, because if ABC Realty has a seller and ABC Realty has a buyer, and that buyer is not interested in that seller's property, that's not dual agency. Please don't ever get confused and think, oh, a firm that works with sellers and buyers is dual agency. No, it has to be the same transaction. So if ABC's buyer is interested in Keller Williams' listing, that's exclusive representation. If Keller Williams' buyer is interested in ABC's listing, that's exclusive representation. It's not until ABC's buyer is interested in ABC's listing that it becomes dual agency, in-house transactions only. So understand that every single agency relationship starts, with the exception of oral buyer agency, right? We'll get there. Starts as exclusive representation, okay? We only care about the buyer to begin with, and we only care about the seller to begin with, and that would only change if dual agency arose. So disclosed dual agency is the only way it's legal, right? With informed and written consent. Now, they're not going to be trying to trick you on the test. You know, I mean, if they say that it was not disclosed, you would have to say that that's unlawful and you're violating laws and rules, but they're not going to typically use the word disclosed verbatim on the test. Just understand that it has to be intentionally created with informed and written consent. Now, here's what Raphael was leading into. And this is where a lot of students struggle because they read ahead and they think that anytime there's two licensees, that it's automatically what we call designated dual agency, and that is just absolutely not the case. You are always defaulting to the worthless crap, even with two licensees. But there are times that we can create something called designated dual agency, and that is where the brokerage firm will designate one licensee to represent the interest of the buyer exclusively, and designate one licensee to represent the interest of the seller exclusively, and they will say, now go for blood, right? Now you can help people. Now you can advocate. We have changed the standards. We have changed the parameters. This has to be intentionally created. This is not the default on your test. So think of it this way, folks. Think of it like an old school night movie, right? And the king says, and it shall be so from this day forward that Sergio shall only represent the interest of the buyer and Lena shall only represent the interest of the seller, and let it be known that no one shall interfere with their quarrel until death they shall battle, right? It's a very formal thing that you need to think about for the sake of this test. Is it formal in the real world? No. But you got to think of it that way. So what happens is, I just use the example of Sergio and Lena. And so what we would basically say is, okay, well, XYZ Realty, Lena has a seller. XYZ Realty, Sergio has a buyer. And the BIC has said, Sergio, you're the designated buyer's agent. Lena, you're the designated seller's agent. And now y'all can go for blood, right? We basically, figuratively speaking, throw you both in the boxing ring and we say, go for blood, right? And the rest of us are on the sidelines in duel, right? The entire firm's still in duel, but y'all were going for blood. And so we're over on the side, go for the kidneys. And everybody's like, which one? I'm like, I don't know. We're neutral. But Sergio is trying to advocate for one, and Lena's trying to advocate for the other. Anthony, if you're looking for the very dramatic king voice again, it's not going to happen. Okay, I'm sorry. I just can't do it. That's going to be a no for me, dog. Okay, you got it once. That's all you get. All right. Go for blood. But this is never going to be the default. Ever, 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 ever. You would have to see things like the word designated, like is advocating, was told to advocate, was appointed, was whatever. But one other word of caution. This acts like, emphasis on that word acts. This acts like exclusive representation, but it is not. Because it is still dual agency. It is a very specific type of dual agency. So there's one firm representing both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. It's just that they have appointed individual licensees to go for blood for the buyer and one to go for blood for the seller. Don't ever call it exclusive representation, but it acts like exclusive representation. What you got, Raphael?
Yeah, I see, like, from, I might be wrong, but it's sounds a little bit unethical. Instead of acting as an intermediary, now you kind of trying to rip off both parties. And one of the parties might have information from the other that, could influence
the negotiations?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say they should act like an intermediary, trying to help both and meet like somewhere in the middle.
Nope, they go for blood. But rest assured, Raphael, I've got an answer for this too, okay? There are 2 times in North Carolina where designated dual agency is prohibited. 2 times. One is, Raphael, if you have already received confidential information about the opposite party. There it is. You're onto something there. You're asking really good questions. You're ahead of the game. So when we go back to the scenarios, folks, let me kind of go back to click, 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 click. This one with Bridge and Page, okay? And Bridge knew confidential information about his buyer. Page knew confidential information about her seller, and neither one of them knew each other's information. And if they don't, and the firm said, okay, well, Bridge's buyer wants to buy this, and the bank says, okay, Bridge, you be the designated buyer's agent. Page, you be the designated seller's agent. Now they can go for blood, and this changes everything. Because now when we go back to Bridge and we say, the buyer says, Bridge, what should I offer? Bridge is going to say, listen, I don't know if you've ever seen Paige's pictures online, but she's got blonde hair, so she probably doesn't know what she's doing, and we can talk her into some stuff. We're going to get you I'm picking on you, Paige, right? You know what they say about blondes. They have more fun and all that good stuff. So Bridge is going to try to get the best deal for his buyers, and Paige is going to try to get the best deal for her sellers because neither of them know these secrets. Does that make sense? So now Bridge is going to say, well, it's listed at 425. Let's start with, 350. Let's start with 400. Let's start whatever the market trends dictate would be a competitive offer. That's what he's going to suggest. And let's say that the offer comes in at 400 now, and Paige's sellers ask, well, should we take 400? Paige is going to say, hell no. We can get more out of Bridge. He's a new agent. He doesn't know what he's doing. We're going to take him up to 425. You see what I'm saying? Now you can advocate when it's designated dual. Not dual. Dual, you're worthless. But when we have designated one to go for blood for the buyer and one to go for blood for the seller, now you can advocate. But I told you 2 times when you can't do it. One is if you've already received confidential information about the opposite party. Well, let me explain. Imagine that one day in the break room that Bridge and Paige were having conversations about their buyers and sellers. And they both did know confidential information about it. And then they ended up trying to do a transaction together. They cannot do designated anymore. But they can still do dual. The bound and gagged and worthless kind. Everybody with me? Now, could we appoint somebody else in the office that doesn't know the secrets to be the designated agent? Sure, of course we could. So let's give you a throwback lesson here, folks. When you get your license issued, it's issued on what 2 statuses? There you go. Provisional and inactive status. And what do you do to activate your license? Get a BIC. There you go. So here is the other time that designated dual agency is prohibited. You cannot do designated dual agency between a provisional broker and their BIC. That is not allowed. Why? Because the BIC is guiding them. The BIC is training them. The BIC has access to all their files. The BIC probably knows secrets already. And so it would not be really fair to allow that transaction to unfold in a go for blood territory. So I'm going to say it again. A provisional broker and their broker in charge cannot do designated dual agency against each other. I'm going to ask you a very important question, okay? And you can either blurt it or put it in the chat. I need you to answer this question. Can a provisional broker and their BIC do dual agency?
Yes.
I'm both impressed and disappointed simultaneously because the amount of people that I normally trick with that question, and y'all didn't fall for it because you caught it. My question was, can a provisional broker and their BIC do dual agency? Yes, all day, every day. Because dual is bound and gagged and worthless. As y'all said in the chat, no harm, no foul. Where's the issue there? And there will be plenty of test questions just like that. Which of the following would be an example of dual agency? A provisional broker doing a deal with their BIC? That is an example of dual agency. They can't do designated against each other, but they can do dual together. Bound, gag, worthless, where's the harm? And as I said, I'm impressed because I always get people with that question. So either I'm teaching y'all too good or y'all paying attention too good or y'all like looking ahead of the cliff notes. I don't know what's happening, but I am impressed. Now here's the thing. Understand that every other combination of designated dual agency is okay. If you were to group them, right? BIC, broker, provisional broker. The broker in charge can do designated dual agency against a full broker in their office. A full broker can do designated dual agency against a provisional broker in their office. A provisional broker can do designated dual agency against another provisional broker. A full broker can do designated dual agency against another full broker. Every other combination is okay. It just cannot go here. A provisional broker cannot do designated dual agency against their BIC. Everybody still okay? So let me take this one step further because you've realized there's levels, right? I teach you this level and then I gotta take it up a little bit. I gotta take it up a little bit. You're right, that's how it goes. Let me show you something interesting. So I'll just use the example here for our sister company, which is Coldwell Banker, Howard Perry and Walston, goes by HPW for short. And if you look at Coldwell Banker, Howard Perry and Walston, or HPW, this right here is what you call a firm license number. And these are all the office locations, and every office has to have its own BIC. Okay, well, let me start with the first question here. If a licensee from this office did a deal with a licensee from this office, what would you call that? Dual agency, because they're the same firm. Different offices, but still the same firm, right? I told you the firm is the agent, not the office, the firm. So let me take this one step further. Imagine that Savannah is a provisional broker underneath Jamie at this office. That is the wonkiest PB, but we'll deal with it. I'm just going to put S for Savannah because you've got a very long name, Savannah. Imagine that Savannah's a provisional broker at this office. Savannah could not do designated dual agency against Jamie. That would not be okay because that's her BIC. But Savannah could do designated dual agency against Roger because that is not her BIC. One of the things that you realize is BICs have to maintain their own office files. Nobody in Savannah's office knows anything about the transaction at Roger's office and vice versa. So we do allow them to do designated dual agency against a BIC that's not their own. And you can see, and once again, this is just an advanced level of helping you understand this. If you look and you can see, like, they have to be specifically named as they are under my supervision. And so they're listed here. So right here, this is Jamie Hamlet. She could not do designated dual agency against this person. She could not do designated dual agency against this person. She could not do designated dual agency against this person. But she could do designated dual agency against all her full brokers, the Bs. And then, of course, she could do designated dual agency against a provisional broker of a different office. Everybody still tracking with me here? So the two times that designated dual agency is prohibited is if you've already received confidential information about the opposite party, or you cannot do it if it is between your BIC and your provisional broker. Raphael, the B is a full broker. When you drop that P, that makes you a full broker. That means you got your 3 post-licensing classes done.
Yeah, but why would you be able to do with the broker and not the provisional?
Because the provisional broker doesn't know his A from his elbow, as they say, and they're reliant on the BIC to figure life out. A full broker probably kind of knows what's going on, and they would hold their own against their BIC at that point in negotiations. It really comes down to, can they protect the client? And as long as they can, then we're fine. The provisional broker would be screwed, though, seemingly so.
But wouldn't the BIC have the same access to the information that the broker has?
Sure. But all they have is files. And so on the files, the listing agreement's going to say what price is listed. That doesn't mean that the full broker ever had a conversation with their BIC on what the seller would accept. We don't put that in the notes or anything like that. So
that is no like
nope, that's not something that's in our file. All the BIC would know is what we listed it at. The BIC's not going to know what the seller said they would take, so they still don't really have anything confidential unless we went and talked to them. And hopefully, because we understand that designated could arise, we wouldn't share that information.
I was under the impression like being the broker in charge, you'd have to be aware of everything that's going on within the office.
No, I mean, think of like a firm that has like 150 agents, and if those 150 agents are doing 2 transactions a month, that's a lot of paperwork. The bigs provide training, they monitor things, they coach people, they answer questions, but you're supposed to know enough of when you need help versus when you don't after you're not a provisional broker anymore. So it's not like they know everything kind of thing. It's not consequential.